Everyone knows Julius Caesar as the conqueror of Gaul, the brilliant general who expanded Rome's empire to the edges of the known world. History remembers the triumph, the glory, the legendary military genius. But here's what your history teacher never told you. Caesar didn't invade Gaul because he was hungry for conquest. He invaded because he was broke. Catastrophically, dangerously broke. And if he didn't find a way out fast, his political career would end not in glory, but in criminal prosecution and financial ruin. This is the story of how one man's personal debt crisis became 1 million Gauls' nightmare. This is Caesar's balance sheet, written in blood and gold. The year is 62 BCE. Julius Caesar has just finished his term as praetor, a high-ranking magistrate in Rome. He's politically ambitious, well-connected, and completely underwater financially. Modern estimates put Caesar's personal debt at around 25 million denarii. That's roughly $450 million in today's money when you adjust for purchasing power. To put that in perspective, that's more debt than most small nations carried. And this was personal debt, not government debt. Caesar's debt. How does someone rack up that kind of tab? Simple. In Rome, political power didn't come from policy platforms or campaign promises. It came from bread and circuses. Literally. If you wanted the people's support, you threw games, you built monuments, you handed out grain, you bought loyalty, and Caesar had been buying aggressively. During his time as aedile, the official in charge of public games, Caesar had staged the most lavish gladiatorial spectacles Rome had ever seen. We're talking 320 pairs of gladiators in silver armor. The costs were astronomical, but it worked. The people loved him. The problem? Caesar had financed this popularity on credit, massive, crushing credit. And his primary creditor was a man named Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Roman history, possibly the richest man who ever lived. Crassus had a net worth estimated at 200 million sesterces, roughly $2 billion today. He made his fortune in the most Roman way possible, buying burning buildings during fires at bargain prices, then sending his private fire brigade to put them out. Real estate, money lending, silver mines, slave trading. Crassus had his fingers in everything. And now he had his hooks in Caesar. Here's where it gets interesting. In Rome, there was a concept called imperium, basically legal immunity. If you held certain offices, particularly military commands, you couldn't be prosecuted while in office. You were untouchable. Caesar needed this immunity desperately, because the moment he stepped down from public office, his creditors could drag him into court. His political enemies, and he had many, were sharpening their knives. The conservative faction in the Senate, the Optimates, would love nothing more than to destroy this populist upstart through legal prosecution for his debts and alleged corruption. So Caesar made a deal. Actually, he made the deal. In 60 BCE, Caesar brokered a secret political alliance that would change history. The first triumvirate. 3 men: Caesar, Crassus, and Pompey the Great. Pompey brought military credibility and popular support. Crassus brought money, lots of it. Caesar brought political cunning. Together, they would effectively control Rome. But this wasn't some noble coalition for the good of the Republic. This was a business arrangement, a cartel. Think of it like a modern corporate merger, except the product was political power and the currency was legions. The arrangement was elegant. Crassus would continue financing Caesar's political rise. In return, Caesar would push through legislation favorable to Crassus's business interests. Pompey would get land for his veterans and validation of his eastern conquests. And Caesar? Caesar would get himself elected consul for 59 BCE, Rome's highest office. And after his consulship ended, he'd need another position with Imperium, another command that would keep him legally protected while he figured out how to pay everyone back. Enter Gaul. Now, let's be clear about what Gaul was. This wasn't some primitive backwater waiting for civilization. By 58 BCE, Gaul was wealthy. Seriously wealthy. The tribes controlled vast agricultural lands, gold mines, and sophisticated trade networks that stretched across Europe. The Gauls weren't savages. They were traders, craftsmen, farmers with established towns and complex political systems. They had gold. Lots of gold. And more importantly for Caesar's purposes, they weren't Roman citizens, which meant that conquering them wouldn't be seen as civil war. It would be expansion. Legal, glorious expansion. Through political maneuvering and the support of his triumvirate partners, Caesar secured the governorship of 3 provinces: Cisalpine Gaul, Illyricum, and Transalpine Gaul. This wasn't just any governorship. This was proconsular imperium, command of 4 legions, roughly 20,000 troops, plus auxiliaries. And here's the kicker. As proconsul, Caesar was again untouchable by Roman law. As long as he held this command, his creditors couldn't touch him, and his enemies couldn't prosecute him. But there was a clock ticking. His command was for 5 years, renewable. Caesar needed to accomplish 2 things in this time. First, stay in command long enough that the statute of limitations ran out on some of his alleged crimes. Second, and more importantly, acquire enough wealth to pay off Crassus and his other creditors, while building a power base so formidable that no one would dare challenge him when he returned to Rome. The financial math was brutal and simple. Caesar needed a return on investment. And war, historically, has always been the ultimate ROI engine, if you win. In 58 BCE, Caesar got his justification. The Helvetii, a Gallic tribe from what's now Switzerland, wanted to migrate through Roman-controlled territory. Caesar, citing security concerns, refused and then attacked. This wasn't defensive. Roman territory wasn't seriously threatened. But Caesar needed a war, and now he had one. What followed was 8 years of systematic, brutal conquest. But here's what makes this different from other military campaigns. Caesar documented everything. His commentaries on the Gallic War wasn't just propaganda. It was a financial prospectus for Roman investors and a legal defense document proving his command was justified. Let's talk numbers, because numbers don't lie. Over the course of the Gallic Wars, Caesar's forces killed approximately 1 million people and enslaved another million. Think about that. 2 million human lives ended or destroyed in 8 years. The slave trade alone generated unprecedented wealth. A healthy Gallic slave could sell for 500 denarii in Rome. That's 500 million denarii from human trafficking alone, not counting the gold, silver, livestock, and land. Ancient sources suggest Caesar sent back so much gold to Rome that the price of gold dropped by 20% across the empire due to oversupply. That's economic impact you can measure. That's what happens when you loot an entire civilization. And the beautiful part, from Caesar's cynical perspective, it was all legal. War booty belonged to the commanding general, minus a cut for the troops and the Roman treasury. Caesar kept meticulous records. Which tribes owed tribute, which lands were confiscated, which slaves went to which markets. This wasn't conquest. This was accounting. This was the world's most violent debt collection operation, and Caesar was balancing his books one decimated tribe at a time. Modern historians estimate that Caesar's personal take from the Gallic Wars was somewhere between 20,000 and 40,000 talents of gold and silver. Let's split the difference. 30,000 talents equals roughly 750 million denarii. Remember, Caesar's debt was around 25 million denarii. He didn't just pay off his debts, he became one of the wealthiest men in Rome. From bankrupt to billionaire, courtesy of the Gallic people who had the misfortune of having gold deposits and living near a desperate Roman debtor. But Caesar couldn't just pocket the money and call it a day. He had to share. Roman soldiers expected bonuses, and Caesar paid generously. A legionary who served through the entire Gallic campaign could expect bonuses totaling several years' salary. Caesar needed loyal troops because he knew that eventually he'd need those troops for protection, not from Gauls, but from Romans. He gave massive gifts to his officers, creating a patronage network that would prove crucial in the coming civil war. He sent huge sums back to Rome to finance massive public works, building projects, and those famous bribes to important political figures. Caesar's wealth was weaponized generosity. Every coin was an investment in future loyalty. And Crassus? Crassus got paid. The poor, exact figures are lost to history, but ancient sources confirm that Caesar's debts to Crassus were settled. The richest man in Rome got richer, and Caesar transformed from debtor to financial equal. The power dynamic shifted when Crassus died in 53 BCE, killed leading a disastrous military campaign in Parthia, possibly trying to match Caesar's military glory and wealth generation. Caesar was no longer anyone's client. He was his own man, backed by loyal legions and bottomless coffers. Here's where the story gets even more fascinating. Caesar's extended command in Gaul was set to expire in 50 BCE. The Senate, now alarmed by Caesar's power and wealth, demanded he disband his legions and return to Rome as a private citizen before running for consul again. This would mean a gap period where Caesar would lose his imperium, his legal immunity. His enemies, led by Cato the Younger and supported by Pompey, who had turned against Caesar, were ready to prosecute him the moment he lost protection. The charges? Corruption during his consulship, illegal conduct during the Gallic Wars, and a laundry list of constitutional violations. Caesar offered a compromise. He'd disband his army if Pompey disbanded his. The Senate, influenced by Caesar's enemies, refused. They gave Caesar an ultimatum: return alone or be declared an enemy of Rome. It was a trap, and Caesar knew it. Returning without his army meant prosecution, financial ruin, and likely exile or death. Everything he'd fought for, everything he'd killed for, would be erased. So in January of 49 BCE, Caesar made a different choice. He took one legion, just one, the 13th, and crossed the Rubicon River, the boundary between Gaul and Italy. Roman law forbade generals from bringing armies into Italy proper. Crossing the Rubicon with troops was essentially a declaration of civil war. Plutarch records that as Caesar approached the river, he hesitated, calculating the odds one last time. Then he uttered the famous phrase, "Alea iacta est," the die is cast, and he invaded his own country. But let's be honest about what this was. This wasn't some principled stand for the Republic or the people. This was a man protecting his investment. Caesar had spent 8 years and 2 million lives building a fortune and a power base. He'd paid off his debts, enriched his soldiers, and bought loyalty across Rome. The Senate wanted to take that away, to reduce him back to nothing, to prosecute him for the very actions that had made him wealthy and powerful. The Rubicon crossing wasn't ideological. It was financial self-preservation with legions attached. The civil war that followed was essentially Caesar's creditors trying to collect one way, and Caesar refusing to let them. Pompey and the Senate had legal authority. Caesar had money and loyal troops. In the end, money and loyalty beat legal authority. Caesar won the civil war, became dictator of Rome, and never had to worry about creditors or prosecutors again. He literally fought his way out of bankruptcy into absolute power. Think about the precedent this set. Caesar proved that in Rome's late republic, if you were willing to be ruthless enough, if you could generate enough wealth through conquest, and if you could buy enough loyalty with that wealth, you could override the entire constitutional system. The message to ambitious Romans was clear. Don't play by the rules. Get an army, find somewhere wealthy to conquer, pay your soldiers well, and come back too powerful to prosecute. It's no coincidence that in the decades after Caesar, multiple generals would try the exact same playbook. The Roman Republic died, not because of ideology or political philosophy. It died because debt-ridden politicians figured out that military command plus foreign conquest equals get-out-of-bankruptcy-free card. Now, here's the modern parallel, because this isn't ancient history. It's a template that keeps repeating. How many times in the past century have we seen leaders start wars or military operations that, when you look at the actual motivations, rather than the public justifications, come down to economics? Whether it's access to resources, protecting financial interests, or distracting from domestic economic problems, the Caesar playbook is still in rotation. We just don't call it war booty anymore. We call it reconstruction contracts, resource security, or protecting national interests. The accounting is more sophisticated, but the fundamental equation is the same. Violence plus extraction equals wealth transfer. Caesar's greatest trick wasn't defeating the Gauls or crossing the Rubicon. It was convincing history that he was a visionary leader rather than a desperate debtor who found a continent-sized ATM and made withdrawals at sword point. For 2,000 years, we've celebrated Caesar's commentaries on the Gallic War as a military masterpiece, but read it again knowing his financial situation. It's not a war journal. It's a justification document for stakeholders. It's Caesar explaining to Rome, to his creditors, to posterity. See, I had to do this. They were threatening us. It was defensive. It was necessary. Meanwhile, he's cataloging exactly how much gold each tribe had and how many slaves each victory produced. It's a conquistador's prospectus wearing a general's uniform. The fall of the Roman Republic wasn't about Caesar's ambition or the corruption of the Senate or the failure of Roman virtues. Follow the money. It was about a system where political advancement required massive expenditures, creating a cycle where politicians had to go into debt to gain power, then had to use that power to extract wealth to pay the debt, which gave them more power, which their creditors and rivals feared, which forced them to extract more wealth and consolidate more power to protect themselves. Caesar was just the first one to fully weaponize this cycle. He turned debt into dictatorship, bankruptcy into empire. When you visit museums and see busts of Caesar, when you read about his military genius, when historians discuss his place in the pantheon of great leaders, remember this. Before he was a dictator, before he was an emperor in all but name, Julius Caesar was a man running from his creditors, who discovered that if you owe someone more money than you can ever repay, and you have access to an army, you don't have a debt problem. Everyone else has a collection problem. Caesar didn't conquer Gaul. He collateralized it. He didn't defeat tribes. He liquidated assets. The Gallic Wars weren't military campaigns. They were the most violent debt restructuring in human history. And we've been calling it glory ever since. That's the untold story. That's the accounting Rome forgot. That's Caesar's real ledger, and it's written in Gallic gold and Roman ambition. The book's balanced. But the cost? 1 million dead, 1 million enslaved, and a republic that couldn't survive the precedent. Not bad for a man who just needed to pay off his credit cards.